Hello, and welcome back to the Wise Athletes Podcast with Joe Lavelle and Dr. Glenn Winkle. On today's episode, number 44, we are joined by virtual cycling's biggest fan, physical therapist Chris Schwenker, who is also the producer of Zone Unique, a virtual cycling-focused website and newsletter, and he is the founder and president of the Dirt Dads Fund, a nonprofit that provides financial support to members of the Dirt Cycling Club, which is the largest cycling club on Zwift. As you know, I'm a big fan of Zwift, but Chris is the most passionate believer in virtual cycling for racing, camaraderie, and community. And he has the most incredible indoor cycling space I have ever seen. As we move toward winter, many cyclists will be looking to stay fit, stay connected to their cycling friends, and stay warm by shifting their riding indoors to participate in the ever-expanding worlds of virtual cycling. If you participate in virtual cycling or are thinking about giving it a try, you should listen in as Chris and I talk about Zwift, why Chris loves it so much, and what are his top tips for how to stay healthy, avoid injury, and have an easy transition to indoor cycling. All right, let's talk to Chris. All right, well, Chris, welcome to the Wise Athletes Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm honored to join you, Joe. I really am.
Well, I appreciate that. I've been following you here for a little bit, and you're really quite an interesting fellow.
You're the one, then.
I'm anxious to hear more about your background and what your learnings and even just how you got so involved in the Zwift community. But let me just say, you are the only PT who has a really big presence in the Zwift community. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get so involved with Zwift?
Sure. Actually, it's I'm very passionate about virtual cycling, not just Zwift, but all virtual cycling platforms.
Okay.
And I guess it stemmed out of a love of cycling in general. I've always been involved in fitness, and cycling just evolved over time. I was heavy into weightlifting, heavy into powerlifting. I played Division III soccer, was recruited to play in college. So I was always involved in fitness. And then as a very young father, actually I shouldn't even say father, as a married individual, my father passed away very young of a sudden cardiac episode. Oh. At that time, I was really lifting very heavy. I was big. I wasn't really into cardio. In fact, I would shun cardio because I wanted every single calorie that I consumed to go into building my muscles. And my wife was pregnant with my first child at the time, and my father never got to meet him. Oh. And I said to myself, this is not the way to go for me. I need to start trimming down. So at that point, I weighed 192 pounds. And I didn't have an ounce of fat on me, right? Relatively.
Holy mackerel.
So I started doing cardio. And one of the things I started to do was ride a bike. I said, this seems interesting. Seems like an efficient way to burn some calories. And much like every single thing that I do in my life, it evolved into basically what I am now. I've raced up and down the East Coast, not at a very high level, at an amateur level, but I've competed. I've done well in some races. I've transformed my body, and I've gotten as low as 128 pounds with body fat that was in 2 to 3% at times. So I made a significant transition, and now my son is 21 years old, and I've evolved into spending a great amount of time of riding my bicycle indoors.
Yeah.
It mainly was the genesis of the indoor cycling, the virtual cycling for me was that as a young father and also as a private practice owner, the time that I had to exercise, which was a huge priority to me, was limited. And it was only limited to times when I wasn't devoting my 100% focus to my family and my practice and doing the things that I needed to do for life. So my solution for that was to do all the things that I need to do for my body and my mind before anybody in the house knew that I was gone. So that was getting up at 4 a.m, training from 4:30 to 6:30. Then when everyone gets going, I get going, and then I'm off to the office. And then when I come back, I can devote my full attention to them. So that's the way it started.
Well, I guess that's what sort of locked you into being inside, because obviously it's dark at this time of day.
Dark and cold also. I don't like being cold. I don't like being wet. I don't like any of that stuff. In addition to the fact that it's extremely dangerous in the area that I live in.
Okay.
So, and I tried all that stuff. I did century rides solo, with 25 degrees and spit and rain. And I'm a firm believer that you only have a few of those in you as a cyclist. And I used up all mine. So now I'm indoors, and lo and behold, there's a whole community of guys that are just like me. And they created a cycling team. And now there are 10,000 members in that team. And we're quite united.
What's the name of the team you're on?
The name of the team is, the acronym is Team DIRT, and it stands for Dad's Indoors Riding Trainers. I
know of them. That's a good group. I join in on their rides off and on.
Yeah, well, we're the largest team on Zwift right now. 10,000 members.
Fantastic.
Upwards of 10,000 members.
Well, fantastic. And you ride a lot. You told me off tape here, 15,000 miles last year. Is that right?
Those are the ones that are recorded on some sort of cycling-related social media. So those are probably the only ones that actually count. But it's probably a few more than that.
Right. I guess I understand that.
If it's not on Strava, then it doesn't count.
There you go. It didn't. Not that it didn't count. It didn't happen.
Didn't happen. So I can't speak authoritatively on those miles, but
okay.
A minimum of 15,000.
Wow. Well, that's quite amazing. I mean, I ride on Zwift myself. It all kind of started all around the time of the pandemic, but really, to be honest, it was a little before, because we were moving into, it was that winter before the pandemic started. And I had decided that I was tired of freezing feet and being cold, trying to ride through the winter.
You used up all those days, didn't you?
I couldn't tolerate it as well, but I did when I didn't feel like I had an alternative. And then finally, even though I had known about Zwift, I just sort of put it away. I tried it once, like when it was brand new, and it just didn't quite work for me. And the computer crashed, and it was kind of a hassle. But I tried it again, and it was much better. It had evolved, in the, 4 years or so in the interim. And I found that it really was awesome. I mean, it didn't start off as a total replacement for riding outside. It just was something to do in the wintertime. But I really found that it's great in lots of ways, not just that I don't have to go freeze. It's that you meet people and you ride with people, and it's a social experience. One, especially if you incorporate like Discord and the technologies that allow you to talk to people while you're riding with them. Heck, you can talk better on Zwift than you can out on the street without having to ride side by side and cars wanting to punish you for being too bold. So I totally understand why you do it. I think especially now as we're moving into this winter, a lot of people are going to start coming into Zwift. I know plenty of people who turn their account off in the summertime and then they turn it back on when it's winter again, and they're going to be doing that. And lots of new people are going to be trying it out. And so maybe we can help some of those people out here. Chris, what do you think?
That's one of my primary motivations with the side projects that I do at this point, is to promote virtual cycling and get the traditional cyclists to open their eyes to that and realize that there is a virtual cycling community, and it's not just a hamster on a wheel mentality anymore.
Yeah.
Being indoors and being warm and being safe and having lights to see is the reason why I started virtual cycling. But it's not the reason why I continued virtual cycling. It's not the reason why I do all of my riding indoors now. It's the community. It's the camaraderie. It's the unity that I feel with the people that I speak to every day. And it's not only when I'm riding. I'm speaking to them all day. They're my friends now, And the racing, if that's your thing, is as competitive or more than it was on the road for me. The teamwork is more cohesive than it was on the road for me. the utilization of technology to enhance the racing experience is far superior than anything that you would experience as an amateur on the road.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about 1 in every 3 races skidding across the pavement until you slow down because your skin was no longer willing to succumb to friction.
Yes. I'm well aware of the risks of crashing. I have been to the hospital on numerous occasions. I quit tree skiing and rock climbing so that I could live longer. And then I took up cycling and I started going to the hospital all the time.
Yes, it's quite nice. And then eventually your family members get sick of that, and they just they tell you to call them when you're done.
Well, and so and I will echo that. Racing on Zwift is really racing. It really is the same. It's not the identical thing. I don't think you learn how to race in the real world by learning how to race on Zwift, but you definitely get a lot of the same experience. It feels like racing. It is, you definitely get the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, just like you would out in the real world. And you can get a murderous workout on Zwift.
That is certainly the case.
There's no getting too bored, and you can't tolerate it like maybe in the old days when you were just on a friction trainer.
No, that certainly is the case. I agree with you 95%. The one thing that I do not agree with you on is that there are definitely tactics on Zwift. All right, my team and I, and a lot of the teams that I race for that have experienced racers that know how to race on Zwift, know how to utilize the drafting algorithm to their full potential. We use tactics. We create breakaways. We chase down things. We are making moves. We're in points races. We're strategizing based upon points and making the calculations as we're racing. In fact, I participated in the Zwift Racing League this morning, which was a points race, and we absolutely did that. And we were sending guys up the road. We were sacrificing guys. We were making moves. We were, one of the beauties of Zwift is that you have all that technology at your fingertips. So now I'm in the final group, and I'm able to turn to my computer and look at what the guy next to me can do for 15 seconds, and determine what I need to do in order to beat him in a one-up sprint. Right, so you can't go over and reach for the guy's Garmin who's riding next to you on the road. All right, it would probably be a very risky situation for a number of reasons. But that is one aspect that's unique to virtual cycling that adds a dimension that you don't get on the road, and that's just one of the many. And I'm not here to say that it's superior or it's better or worse. It's different and it's unique, and it's something that if you don't experience it just because you're closed-minded, you are missing out on a lot.
Right. Yep. People should try it. I totally agree. My first big question for you, Chris, you as a physical therapy professional, what's your advice to the cyclist who is going to transition from riding out in the real world to riding indoors? And, and maybe it's on Zwift, but, whatever, some virtual thing or just some training program, but they're going to be on essentially a bike that's on a trainer or a stationary bike. From a physical stress perspective, how is it different? Are there things that people can do to avoid maybe getting injured or avoid pain that maybe comes from such a transition?
Okay, so there are a number of different things that I would say to answer that question. The first thing is that a proper bike fit is always a great idea. Okay, so a lot of people they don't necessarily use their outdoor bike indoors, and that can be problematic because once you change any of the parameters that are involved in your cycling setup, it changes things for you musculoskeletally, and the interfaces between you and your bike are different. Okay, and because cycling is so repetitive, it does set you up for repetitive use injuries and other things like that. Okay. The other thing about riding indoors and utilizing virtual platforms is that, and studies have shown this, and I've written about a few of them, that the motivation factor is enhanced. So because you're riding with other people and there are other people around you, whether they're in the same room as you are not, or on the same road as you are not, when you're in the presence of other people, you become very competitive. And because of that, you become highly motivated and you have a tendency to ride harder than you should more often.
All right.
And it's very important to realize that recovery is as important as the training days. In fact, some of the time, it's more important than training days. So that's something that you really have to take into account. The fact that you have to recover. You shouldn't be pushing every day. You need to periodize your training. You need to be sensible about what you do. But otherwise, the same exact advice that I would give somebody who rides exclusively on the road, I would give to the people who ride indoors. You have to make sure that your flexibility is good. You have to make sure that your muscle imbalances are being addressed. You have to make sure your core strength is addressed and as strong as possible. The difference is, and I know that I'm sure that you're kind of hinting towards this, is that it's a very static environment when you ride indoors. There's not a lot of movement of the bike that you would get outdoors. There are ways to change that. There are cycling setups that mimic the inclination and declination that you would find in outdoors, and the front of your bike goes up and down according to the course that you ride on. That's called there's a product that's created by Wahoo that allows you to do that. It's actually quite neat. Okay. I have one of those, and one of the main reasons why I did it was because you do want to vary your position and change like that. So you want to make sure that your saddle is appropriate for you, and you want to make sure that everything is set in a way that you're able to ride and be relaxed and not have any stress or strain at any place.
Yeah, one of the experiences I had, maybe you can speak to this, was that when I'm riding outside, I'm moving. I'm out of the saddle, I'm down, I'm sliding up and back, and so I'm moving around on the saddle pretty often. But when I was riding indoors, I was actually pretty static. I wasn't moving around on the saddle much. And so my saddle, which never gave me any trouble, I mean, for multiple hour-long rides, no saddle problems. But riding for, say, an hour and a half or 2 hours on an indoor trainer, I'm dying.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn some tricks. What do you have to say about that?
I 100% agree with your experience. I know that does happen to a lot of people. It doesn't happen to me, but I have a feeling that those parts have been conditioned over many miles, over many hours, over many years.
Yeah.
And even if it did, I would deny that it occurred anyway.
Okay.
That's just the cycling mentality, and of course I'm joking, but the getting up out of the saddle every for certain intervals, adjusting your weight, doing those things, and that's one of the advantages to indoor cycling, is that you don't have to worry about being in an arrow position, so you can sit upright, you can keep your hands on the hood, you can keep your hands in the drops, you can do whatever, and it's not going to really affect your performance at all. Relatively, what I'm saying, based upon the coefficient of gravity and other things. But anyway, so that's one of the ways that you can do it. But if you were the cycling coach for a big time trial, let's say Fabian Cancellara, right? And your coach said to you, you're going to go out and do a 2-hour time trial. Would the coach tell Fabian ideally to not change his position 1 millimeter if that was possible?
I have no idea what they would tell him.
I think it would, because they want to put him in the most efficient position possible, and that way there's no risk of there ever being any loss of efficiency, any loss of power, any loss of anything. So,
okay.
In an ideal world, that's the way it would be. It's not realistic, of course, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's the comfort factor is a huge factor, and in a lot of ways you can address it indoors by doing a number of different things. And one of the things is that if you need to get off the bike for 2 seconds, you just do it. You don't have to worry about your friends riding down the road without you.
That's true. There is an analog to Zwift and your friends riding off down the road is because if you're in a ride with a group of people, they actually do ride off without you. And,
Absolutely.
And maybe they'll just do another lap and come back around and you can wait for them. But
or a lot of these rides have a late entry feature where you can log out and log back in, and it puts you right next to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. A good point. Well, awesome. So there are some other things like the steering is something that is not involved. I think there is a stereo or some product.
Right. It's called the Sturzo, but it really hasn't caught on really.
Yeah, they have some races where it's enabled, but mostly I think it's disabled for racing, and it doesn't really do much.
Yeah, I've yet to be involved in a race where it was enabled, and I rarely ever come up on anybody when I'm free riding or just training that's actually using it.
Yeah. And then the side to side is the other thing, because you're in a fixed trainer. Now you were talking about things you could do, and that's like rocker plates where you put the trainer and the bike on top of a plate that moves, and they can move in all different directions. They can just sort of like be on top of like rubber balls where as you lean on it, it leans. As you put weight on it, it'll lean over. And I've even seen some that are on tracks and they go forward and backwards.
Right.
And so there's opportunities to spend more money and have a better experience.
I think it's all bred out of a want or a need to try to replicate the outdoor experience as much as possible for people.
Yeah,
that's one of the ways that it can happen. I for one I don't have a rocker plate. I do have the climb that makes the bike go up and down in the front, but I'm also I fancy myself a climber, so that's something that's important. Right. But otherwise, I built a platform and I strapped my trainer down to it, and I strapped everything down. So every ounce of power that I put in the pedals ends up in that trainer somehow. None of it gets lost to any movement otherwise.
Right. Well, that's the goal for sure. Let's talk a little bit about your physical therapy advice for people. I don't think we have quite mentioned here in our discussion all of the various things that you're doing for your own audience. You've got the Dirt Club that you're with, and you do the nonprofit as a part of that. Give you a chance to talk about that here later. You do a newsletter, and you've got a website full of resources, and a lot of the resources have to do with, like preventing injury or dealing with injuries or dealing with pain and that sort of thing. And that's, I know how to say it. Give me just a moment here. Zamunique.
Very good. Yeah, the Zamunique is my fitness and virtual cycling blog site that I created a few months ago.
Yeah.
And that came out of my motivation to give back to my bicycle for all the great experiences that it's provided me. So I'm very fortunate. I've had a practice, and through the good fortune of some fairly sound decisions and some good luck, it's provided me the opportunity to have flexibility and to be independent in a lot of areas. And one is the ability to ride my bike all over, and the other is to take time to write some things. I've always been really interested in writing, and I would always joke that I would have been a reporter or a writer if I hadn't been so into fitness and other things. So now I have the opportunity to combine the two and to help out people in the process and promote the things that I'm passionate about, which is cycling in general, virtual cycling, and the just general fitness and wellness and utilizing exercise to just enhance yourself as a person.
Right. And in the past, and to some extent currently, you were a physical therapist, are a physical therapist, but also run a physical therapy practice. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I have a independently owned private practice. I've been in private practice for 20 years. Yeah. I have employees. I have therapists. My wife and my wife is an RN, and after our children were born, she didn't continue the practice nursing. She raised the kids, and then we built up the practice together. So she and I, she's the office manager. She's the one that does all the work, basically.
Right.
And at this point, I have a really loyal and incredible set of employees and staff that are really great to me, and they make me look good every day.
Well, sounds like the ideal situation. Getting back to all of the learnings that you have acquired in your work there, would I be right in saying that your practice was about more than just like recovery and helping people to rehabilitate from injury, but you were also helping them maybe prevent injuries and improve performance?
I would have to say that my practice is primarily education and prevention, and the recovery, recuperation, and rehabilitation is secondary to that. But as physical therapists, my primary goal, at least it is for me, is to try to determine what the root cause of the problem is, and then through lifestyle changes or otherwise, prevent it from happening in the future. I see a decent number of athletes, but that's not a huge portion of my clientele. We have a general practice, and sometimes it's more rewarding for me to have somebody who's spent a month in the hospital and can barely move a muscle walk out of my office like nothing ever happened. And when people ask him if anything did, they say, "I don't remember." That's what's most rewarding to me. I can make somebody run faster who's already fast, but if you can make somebody walk who can't get up out of bed, I think that's much more rewarding.
Sure. Well, I can appreciate that. For the audience here listening to the Wise Athletes podcast is generally older athletes who are, except for those unfortunate visits to the hospital, they're generally healthy, but they would like to be stronger, or maybe they get injured periodically and they'd like to figure out how to avoid that, or so they're looking for performance enhancement opportunities, injury prevention, improved resiliency. I think falls sort of within that expanded bubble of information. So focusing on that kind of a thing, and I suppose some of that knowledge that you have comes from your own personal experience and your own journey as an athlete. I'm still sort of stunned that you went from I can't remember the exact numbers, but something like 190 pounds with no body fat to 130 pounds with no body fat.
Yeah, it was. It obviously didn't happen overnight, but that's
yes,
that's the form matches function situation, and being extremely self-motivated and diligent and very disciplined in what you do. And to sometimes to an extreme level, but never anything that was unhealthy in my mind. People have said to me, "You're obsessed with cycling." I say, "Absolutely, it's a healthy obsession, and I'm proud of it." And I wouldn't change a thing. But yeah, physical therapy is an incredible profession, and I always knew that I was going to do something health related that was related in some way to athletics or promoting a healthy lifestyle for people. So, the specifics of things that prolong our lives, our sporting lives, our recreational athletic lives as masters athletes is maintaining a certain level of fitness. And it's important, especially as cyclists, to vary what we do. Like a lot of cyclists, they want to get on their bikes, they want to ride all day, and they could care less about doing anything else. But it's extremely detrimental and it's not beneficial. We need to do other things, right? We need to do things that cause us to be able to weight bear. Cyclists are prone to osteoporosis, osteopenia, low bone mass density, because cycling isn't really a weight bearing sport. So it's really important that we do some sort of strength training, some sort of something that provides load bearing stress to our joints and bones. In addition to the fact that every decade after the age of 50, we're losing muscle mass, and I'm pretty sure that it's at about 5% a decade, which is that's a pretty significant number. Sarcopenia is a normal effect of aging, and it can be combated if you address it with resistance training, strength training. So it's really important. Cyclists are really great at riding their bikes and pedaling in circles, but as soon as you take that away from them and you try to get them to do other things, then the wheels fall off. Right? And I remember one time I got to the point where I was riding so much that when I tried to go take a walk, it felt weird. It's really important that we do these things, and in order to maintain general health and also to be able to perform at a high level.
Yeah, and be able to stand up straight when you're not sitting on a bicycle.
There's a large portion of the Immunique that's dedicated strictly to different core strengthening progressions and the importance of that. And one of the things that I always take for granted is that athletes have a baseline knowledge of exercise and exercise science and exercise physiology, just because I think that's something that's just like common knowledge to everybody. And of course it's not. And I'm always amazed that when people ask me, different exercises to do, when they're an athlete, I think I need to figure out some secret exercise that they've never learned before. When it turns out that they're doing exercises that I would give my 80-year-old hip replacement patients, because they don't do anything else. It doesn't take a lot, but it has to be done. And core strengthening, resistance training, flexibility, maintaining muscle imbalances, trying to eliminate muscle imbalances and identifying them, and these things are essential for us to continue to enjoy the sport that we love, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Any other tips, things that people should do, and then we'll talk about things that they should avoid doing?
Cycling in particular, there are certain muscle groups that are extremely important. Because you're in your trunk is in a flexed posture for a prolonged period of time, you experience what is considered adaptive shortening of the muscles in the front of your trunk area. So your hip flexors get shorter. And there are studies that show that when you're utilizing those muscles in a shortened position, that it actually accelerates the rate at which they lose their flexibility. And the inverse to that is the muscles on the opposite end of that flexed posture, like your glutes, your hip rotators, your spinal extensor muscles. They experience what's considered reciprocal inhibition, whereas they get shut off because they're in a constant lengthened position. So they no longer fire and react the way that they should. So it's really important as cyclists to try to combat that flexion posture by opening up your hips, working on improving the flexibility in those hip flexors and in the hamstrings, and then really doing some focused strengthening on the posterior muscle groups like the glutes, the spinal extensors, the core in general. So those are two really important concepts that as a cyclist you really should be focusing on.
Yeah, I wonder if there are some specific exercises or things that people could do. Maybe it's go for a hike that would serve to accomplish what you're saying people should do.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with Phil Cavell, but he recently wrote a book called The Midlife Cyclist.
No, say the name again. I'm sorry.
It's called The Midlife Cyclist, and Phil Cavell is a very famous bike fitter. Okay. He actually is a bike fitter for a number of pro teams, and out of the UK. And a lot of his concepts, bike fitting and the pedal stroking things is very controversial. Everybody seems to think that they know the best way to do it, when really there are very few people that understand it really well because there are so many variables involved. But as far as I'm concerned, he has a pretty good handle on it, and he put a lot of it on paper. And his concept is that as master cyclists, we're basically we're exercise pioneers, because evolutionarily there weren't any athletes that lived this long to study, because in the caveman era nobody lived this long, and then in future prior generations, people our age thought that exercise was the devil and that you should stay away from it. So he it's very interesting that he says that. But what I'm getting to is that he very much thinks that exercises like Nordic hiking, where you're utilizing poles, so you're like almost like a 4-wheel drive going up a hill, is a really great cross training exercise for cycling.
Yeah. So you're using your upper body,
and
you're in a more upright position,
right? And because you're on an incline, it causes you to fully extend your trunk and other things to try to combat that flexion posture.
Okay, so anybody who lives in a wintry place and can do cross-country skiing
Right, that's
uphill, then that would be one thing they could do.
Yeah, and I wrote a review on the book. It's in the Communique. It's a really great book, and I recommend it.
Well, maybe we can get a link to that article I guess it's on your website at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then any kind of articles that you think would be relevant to people who are interested in knowing what things that they could do.
Well, I don't know about you, Joe, but I think that every single article in the Communique is relevant and important to people.
There you go. We surely will be sending people to your website, but as far as the show notes,
yes,
any in particular that you think are relevant for the older athlete.
Absolutely, and please, I'm humbled and flattered whenever anybody reads any of my articles. I really am. So,
and I have read several of them so far, and you're obviously very knowledgeable about what you're talking about. So glad to get some of that information from you and get that in the show notes. So I guess we were talking about things that people should do. Would you have a similar list of things people should avoid?
Well, one of the things, are we speaking about virtual cycling in particular or just cycling in general?
Well, start with the virtual and then, anything else you think that people really ought to know. Go ahead.
Okay, well, the virtual cycling, one of the main things, and I wrote a couple articles on it that were extremely popular because it really isn't something that people think about. It is the air quality in the space that they exercise in. It's extremely important. Not only the temperature and the humidity, but the carbon dioxide level, the level of particulates. So I did an impromptu experiment. I got a hold of an air quality meter, just a personal unit that you can use in your house, and I went into my workout area and I jumped on a group ride with a bunch of guys, and I told them what I was doing, and I asked one of them, what is the indoor space that you are presently riding in like? And he's like, okay, I got no windows, the doors are closed, this and that. So I tried to mimic that. Yeah. And the CO2 level in my gym went from a level that was considered acceptable to one that was considered dangerous in a very, very short period of time. And you wouldn't know it unless you actually monitored it. So the air quality in your workout space is extremely important. There are harmful chemicals that are and other irritants that are emitted by a washer dryer, an oil burner, and these are people people are looking for the most out of the way space to plop their trainer in because they want it. They don't want it to be an eyesore. They want it to get in the way, and it can really be dangerous for people. So addressing the air quality is super important.
Okay, good tip.
Also, the temperature and the humidity is incredibly important, not only for health and wellness, but also for performance. Your performance drops significantly.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you're not riding outside and you don't get any of that natural wind from moving forward along the ground, if you don't have a fan, it's a horror. Got to have a fan.
Absolutely, and I've taken it to an extreme because it's what I do. So I have a high-powered air filtration device. I have a air conditioner that pulls air from the outside and also exhausts air to the outdoors. That's extremely efficient that I use as well. So those are really important things for people if you want to do it in the most healthy and safe way. But then also the getting back to things that you should avoid. You should avoid riding a bike that isn't 100% properly professionally fit to you.
Right. So if it's your old bike that you got fitted on 15 years ago, and that's the one that you have on the trainer, then you're probably injuring yourself by switching to that bike for the winter.
Yeah, that's extremely important. And it's there are a number of other things like People don't think to address the shoes that they wear, and even more importantly, the structure of the undersurface of your foot. Like, I always advocate the use of some sort of an insole or insert that, the majority of the time that they're very flimsy that you get in cycling shoes. It's kind of a joke.
Right.
So it's really important to address that as well, and that'll help lock in
Right.
your lower extremities in that way, and then just keep everything functioning as efficiently as possible.
And usually a fitter will deal with that. But if you've been self-fitting, then that's something to not ignore.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then the other things are I think, to avoid doing all the things that I've mentioned previously that you should do.
Right.
So it's more of a prevention thing than an avoidance thing. You want to prepare. You don't want, it's in some instances it's better to ask for forgiveness and then permission, but this isn't one of them.
And if they're going to do Zwift, the whole gamification, especially early on, is very motivating, because the higher you go, the more things you can buy, and the better, because you can actually get faster just by buying better stuff. And that comes from riding more. And so you're encouraged to ride more. And,
Right.
and one of the best things you can get is a futuristic looking bicycle that takes an amazing amount of hours riding on Zwift in order to be able to get. And so people will really try to just go day after day, hours and hours, and they're not being careful about their recovery. So you had talked about that and that's definitely something to watch out for.
Absolutely. And then there's another element of that as well, is that there are periodic sprint points, and there's a leaderboard, and you come up on those fairly periodically, and you're, invariably you want to race the guy next to you and get your name up on that leaderboard, or KOM segments and things like that you have your occasional town line sign, but if you're out there by yourself, there's no real reason to go for it.
It's true. It's an interesting mental discipline that really any athlete has got to be good at, having a discipline around the intensity of their workout. And there's just something particularly hard about Zwift. I am embarrassed to even think about all the times that I went on and I was just going to spin my legs, zone one. And the next thing I know, my heart rate is up and I'm racing some group of people and not wanting to get dropped. And I'm like, what in the hell am I doing? I am totally not doing a recovery.
Yeah, you told yourself you weren't going to do that, but you end up doing it. Yeah, and there are actual psychological reasons for that, and there have been studies done. And I wrote an article recently that I haven't published yet, but that there's research that suggests that there are reasons why, and we may just be adhering to the hardwired circuits in our brains, and Zwift has figured out a way to tap into those.
Well, yeah, that's where I was going to go. It's not like Zwift is ignorant about this whole thing, and they're a form of social media. They know how to push our buttons and get us to like it more. So everybody is forewarned now. So they are forearmed to deal with that. I wonder if you could tell us. Say again?
There's a chance you might get hooked. Just beware.
Right. So talking about getting hooked, you had talked about at one point before we started recording that you did what you called a Zwift Everest. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, actually, it's what's considered amongst the virtual cycling world, the V Everest thing. And I know that with the recent pandemic situation that we've been in, it's been really popular amongst high-level cyclists to do what's called Everesting, and that's basically you go out on the road and you pick a climb that you're able to do repeatedly, and you climb the height that's equivalent to Mount Everest, and I think it's like 32,000 feet or something like that, somewhere. And there's an actual association that certifies your ride, and you get put on the list, and you're on the Everesting Wall of Fame and all this other stuff, and you can buy merchandise that proves that you have
29,032 feet.
Right. Okay. There you go. That's a number that I should really know, but I tried to put it out of my mind. So the virtual equivalent of that is what's called the V Everesting, and it's also recognized by the the sanctioning body that certifies everything. And the only difference is that when you're descending, you're allowed to get off your bike and stretch out, which certainly makes it a lot easier. And I'm not going to deny the fact that it doesn't. But it's going the uphill. The uphill part is the same as it would be outdoors.
Yes.
And it takes a long time, just like it does outdoors. And you feel it in your legs, just like you would do in the outdoors. And you go through the waves of emotion and physical, mental, otherwise that you would outdoors as well.
Well, how long did it take you?
Well, I woke up at 2 a.m. so that I could get a little bit of sustenance in my body, and I started at around 3, and I went for 12 hours. That's how long it took me, was 12 hours. And it's kind of, you say 12 hours, that's a lot. It's actually a okay time for somebody to do that. There are some people it takes a really long time, but there are other people that are way out of my league, and maybe out of yours that do it in almost half the time. So it's one of those things, but it's a challenge just like anything else. And as a climber, like I had mentioned, that I like to, if you have to categorize yourself as a cyclist, as a climber or a sprinter, I'm certainly on the climbing realm, and because of that, it was a challenge that I felt that I had to achieve.
Nice. Well, I have never attempted that. I have done there's a ride in Colorado called the Triple Bypass, and that takes a while. I think I did that in roughly 7 hours. But of course, I got off the bike at least twice during that and stretched my legs, and so. But 12 hours, that's super tough. And so I have heard of pros doing that, and in real life as well as on Zwift, and people do that for fundraising lots of times. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think that anything can be used as a fundraiser in essence, right? But because it's such an extreme challenge, it's something that people can get behind, because a lot of people can't picture themselves doing it. So it certainly allows you to be united behind the person that does.
Well, and you interestingly have a nonprofit associated with the Dirt Cycling Club. And you were telling me that somebody had done this, or was it a 24-hour thing that was a fundraiser?
Yeah, I created a charity based upon my virtual cycling team. It's called the Dirt Dad Fund.
Okay.
And it's based upon the concept that that we're fathers, and then when you have a team that's 10,000 strong, invariably there's somebody who's down on their luck or needs some help financially or otherwise. So what I decided was that in addition to being very much united in cycling and family as a priority, these guys are also extremely proud and not willing to take handouts from people. So what I decided was, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create unique, limited edition, one-of-a-kind merchandise based upon the different logos and other branding with the Dirt Cycling Team, and I'm going to sell that to our members. And they're going to get this really great merchandise, high-quality stuff that's unique, and I'll sell it, and all the proceeds will go into this Dirt Dad Fund. And then when one of our members needs something, I'm going to help them out. So they're not actually getting a handout from anybody. They're getting the proceeds of this merchandise. So it's kind of, it was a way for me to help out people who are proud, but they need the help, but they don't want to ask for it. And it's easier to accept because I'm not handing out. And it's also easier to raise money because I don't have my hand out to other people, right? You're getting something in return. So that was the whole concept behind the Dirt Dad Fund. And I'm really proud to say that our membership is extremely generous. The outpouring of support has been overwhelming. We've been able to help so many people. One of our members, his wife got cancer, and the only treatment was experimental, and he had to go to Mexico. So we gave him a bunch of money so that they could go do that. Unfortunately, one of our members decided to make the bad decision and go ride his bike outdoors, and he never made it home. So we We gave some money to his kids' college fund. He's got a bunch of little kids at home. It's just heartbreaking. Yeah, and a bunch of we had another one of our members whose wife also needed some cancer treatment. We gave her money, and then we also do other things like not only negative stuff but also positive stuff. If you've had a life event, I send edible arrangements to different people's homes to thank them or to congratulate them, or when they need a little pick me up, individual things like that. So yeah, it's just kind of an extension of me wanting to give back to my bicycle and all the great people and unique experiences I've had because of it. And like I said, I'm in the enviable position that I have the independence and to be able to work on these different things. And a charity in a lot of ways is a very thankless thing, but when it does thank you, it makes up for all the hard days of trying to to balance the books and get registered as a 501c3 charity with the government and all that other stuff. Yeah. And I wouldn't trade it for a second. And the other thing that's an incredible benefit is that my family is all on board with it. My son is a graphic arts and design major in college, so he does all the IT stuff for me. My wife and daughter are our distribution team. They take care of all the shipping and everything. My wife has become extremely adept at filling out customs forms and sending things. We just sent a package out to Malaysia the other day.
Right, I guess that's true. You have team members all around the world.
All over the world. It's really overwhelming. It's incredible, and the thing that is unique and great about virtual cycling is that you can ride with them as if they were in your basement with you.
That's a nice little story there. Thanks for that. We've gotten through my list of things that I wanted to cover. Is there anything else that you think that our audience would be better off knowing?
Well, that is a great question. One of the things that I love to speak about most is myself. But no, I think that we covered a lot of really important things here, and I want to make it really clear that of course it's virtual cycling is only a small facet of what is so great about our sport. The bike is so appealing in so many different ways. You can just go out and just lose yourself in it, right? Or you can go out and try to push the limits of your body and see where it can take you, and push yourself and learn stuff about your body that you would never learn before. Or when I go on vacation, I take my bicycle with me. So
really?
Oh, absolutely. So when you speak about doing the triple bypass, when I took my family, we went to Rocky Mountain National Park. I rode up Pikes Peak. I rode up and down Trail Ridge Road.
Nice.
I've ridden my bike all over Yellowstone Park. I rode it in between two bison, which really wasn't a smart idea. I rode it within about 5 feet of a black bear. And when I was doing that ride, I got to see two pronghorn antelope sparring in a field as I was riding by, and these things you don't get this stuff when you're driving in the family truckster down the road, But on the other hand, virtual cycling has a lot to add that if you don't experience it, you're really missing out on. So, also the other facet of this that I devoted my life to is that in order to continue to enjoy your sport, whether it be cycling or otherwise, you have to take care of the engine. You got to make sure that everything is as strong and as maintained as possible, because you're joking yourself if you think that you can just ride your bike and that everything else will fall into place, because that is not the case. And as we get older, it becomes less and less of a realistic likelihood.
Right.
So it's if you get nothing else out of this conversation between Joe and myself, that should be the one thing that would be paramount to you.
Yeah, the tagline for the podcast is athletic performance longevity, and that's just a made-up phrase that I came up with to try to make the point that we don't just want high performance today. We want to stay athletic and strong for a long time as a part of a long life. And you're saying you got to take care of yourself. Well, yes, that makes sense.
And cycling is a sport where it is a lifelong sport. And the advent and the popularity of virtual cycling makes it even more so. I expect to ride my bike until to my dying day, and hopefully I'm not dying when I'm on it. But anyway, I'm going to be one of those guys that I'll probably have trouble walking, but when I get on my bike, it'll look like I have no issues at all. And I'm hoping that is the case. I really do.
Yes, and I'll be right there with you. I love riding my bike. In fact, I rode my bike earlier today on Zwift.
Yeah, so did I. Actually, I raced my bike earlier today on Zwift, and I got to tell you that I felt like I was dead.
Nice. All right. Well, Chris, thank you very much. I'm going to get some links from you so people can find you, find your website, find your newsletter, maybe find you on social media if you participate in such things. And then people can reach out to you directly if they have any more questions. So thanks again.
I'd really like to thank you. It's been an honor. It really has. I hold you and what you're doing in really high regard, and it's a highlight for me to be able to speak with you for all this time and to be considered as somebody who you think that my opinion means to, and it really means a lot to me. And I thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. You have a good day.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening in to my discussion with Chris Schwenker about how to use virtual cycling to expand the joys of riding a bike. And thanks to Chris for taking some time to share his experience. You can find more information about Chris in the show notes. And while you're there, you can sign up to take a free fitness practices assessment, send us a question to address on the podcast, see all of our episodes, subscribe to our podcast, and you can sign up for our newsletter. If you're on social media and enjoyed this episode, please post about it. That would be a great help. Thanks again.